Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, continuing with our preseason tier list, stepping into Tier D, the one that we have nicknamed the 50-50 Club, and we will explain what that means and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Another podcast in. I'm doing so well, my man. I'm so excited to talk about these two teams. I'm just OUA football in general with you. Let's get into this.
And as I promised, I think I nailed the cadence this one after a bit of rust on the first one we did coming back. We're here with Tier D. If you tuned into our first tier preseason tier pod, you heard us break down the two teams in Toronto, U of T and York. Tier E, winning isn't everything tier. And we're getting into the next two clubs. And off the jump, we're talking McMaster and Waterloo today. And hearing those names, I can hear, even though at the time of recording, people won't be listening to it at the same time, but I can just hear all the U of T fans being, why are we beneath a tier that has McMaster, a team we've beaten twice in the last 2 years? Well, we'll get into that. And it has a lot to do, again, with why we've named these two clubs the 50, pardon me, named this tier the 50-50 Club. Before we get into all this, let's just set the table a little bit, looking at how these clubs have fared in the decade post the pandemic. Going back to 2021, both clubs finished 3-3 in the shortened season after the missed year. In 2022, Mac goes 2-6, Waterloo 1-7. For Mac, that included the disqualified game against York. And then last year, Waterloo goes 3-5, makes it into the playoffs, gets the last seed. Mac goes 2-6. One of the things that these two teams share in terms of similarity, and we'll get into that 50-50 name in a second, is both coming off of, for Waterloo, the end of the Trey Ford era ended in 2021, the COVID shortened year. For Mac, the Andreas Duick era ended the following year. Era defining quarterbacks, none more so than Trey Ford, but Andreas Duick, and of course doing his thing coaching now, was a stellar quarterback. And both these teams trying to find their identity while all the while maintaining an identity at the coaching level and just trying to figure themselves out. The name 50-50 Club, and I'll let you jump on this point, is because we've been talking about this theme for the last pod and just in our conversations of teams where you're in that space, where you're in games, you're competitive. You're in those ball games that, if not for seemingly a coin toss, a 50-50 chance, a play here or there, you ended up on the losing side of them. We'll go through the schedule from last year talking about some of those games, but that was really where we ended up locking in with these two teams as the similarity they both have in coming off of era-defining quarterback play in the last 2-3 years and being teams in which you're competitive and you have a fan base in Mac that's obviously very frustrated that you've been in those competitive games. It feels like for them, it's a bit of a, it's a neighborhood you don't want to be hanging out in. For Waterloo, it's about growth. Tom, what do you have to say off the jump looking at these two teams, this 50-50 Club, Tier D?
Yeah, to really dive into the 50-50 Club and what that kind of means, a big topic, something that we brought up a whole bunch of times in the previous season, what we're going to continue to do, is that every single game has what we call these jump ball moments where, for an example, there's a ball that's tipped up in the air on a pass. Who's going to come down with it? It's a game defining play within every one of these games. And more often than not, in the past couple of years, both McMaster and Waterloo have been on the opposite side of that. They've been on the losing end of it. When you look at McMaster in particular is the most egregious example of this. I would say, and call me a homebody, do whatever you want to say, apart from the Laurier game, McMaster has a legitimate chance to win every single game that they were in last year. There's a world where the MAC team last year is 7-1. They were right on the cusp. The week one game, you and me went to it against McMaster and Windsor. How many times was Mac almost like practically in the red zone or just about to get to the red zone and stalled out, couldn't make a field goal, had some momentum on offense, but just could not finish. And then eventually Windsor was able to find their offense, take over the game, and get the win there. But they had every opportunity to beat Windsor. They had every opportunity to beat Western, driving at the very last one of the last drives of this of the game, and to get picked off. They show their stuff against York, which everybody did. Guelph game was close. Toronto, obviously the win with Waterloo and Ottawa, kind of on that cusp. The only game that I was like from start to finish, you were not in this whatsoever, was Laurier because they really did their thing. But in all of those games, there was jump ball moments. There was opportunities for them to take over the game and to really win, and they weren't able to do that. Similarly with Waterloo, you look at the Ottawa game at the very first game of the season. How many opportunities did they have in order to take over from the GGs at TD Place and get a dub there? Obviously the Windsor game was a tough one. The Lancers came through hard with that. Same with the Battle of Waterloo, but you beat Guelph coming off of that. You're in the game somewhat with McMaster. You lose by one freaking point against Carleton. Like, you are right there. It's time. That's with the message with both of these teams. It's time to start winning those jump ball moments. Let's get going here, because your upside has massive potential, but your downside also is pretty scary to think about.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. And like they're right in that 50-50 territory because, of course, you can look at their schedule and say, well, for Waterloo, they could have just as easily lost that Guelph game. Like maybe they beat Ottawa, but they lose it. But that's exactly what we're saying. They're in this position where they're putting themselves, and that's all you can want as a coach, to have your team in a position in the second half, better in the fourth quarter, to win ball games. And that's where it feels like both these clubs are. Is it now going to translate to winning more of those games than you're losing and starting to be competitive? As you mentioned, both these teams played Laurier last year, Waterloo twice, because of course they played them in the playoffs as well. Nowhere near that level. Are you now at a stage where you take that jump, you win more of those 50-50 games, and you not even give a scare, but like show that you can play a football game against some of those top echelon teams, or those teams in the couple tiers above them, and that's where we really see the similarities. I think you broke that down brilliantly. Let's look, much like we did with tier E, look at some of these rosters again, not having updated rosters, but doing a little bit of who was in what year of eligibility and academic year last year, 2023, and what that might mean for this upcoming year. Starting with McMaster, as far as guys that were fifth year eligibility, so we can say with certainty they will not be returning, include Eric Bajalski, linebacker, Ryan Leader, defensive end, and Jacob Bradley on the offensive line. Obviously, that offensive line has had a lot of problems for them over the last couple of years. And, so you could say, well, what does it matter? Well, veteran presences matter on offensive lines. They've had consistency there as far as from the coaching standpoint. So that's huge. Ryan Leader has been a star for them, and Bajalski, again, part of Coach Brady's defense that's been really solid. Just to add a few more names as far as guys that were in their fifth year academically, which again might mean they graduate out, include the likes of our guy Josh Cumber, defensive back, Daniel Bossett, who, though they couldn't get really any running game going, any version of it connected with him, or started with him, running the ball. Jacob Mason, Daniel Stefanik, Greg Thomas, Owen Hubert, along with Ryan Leader, a big loss on that defensive line if Hubert's not back. Paul Badalina on the offensive line, and Taylor Burns. And a few other guys: Jacob Patton, Dima Ignatьевич, and Michael Martin, also on the offensive line. I think I got them all. Maybe I'm missing a few, but say what you want about whether it's the offensive line, guys who are leaving, and those are gaps that need to be filled. Not having the new rosters yet, we don't know who are filling those positions just yet. Allow me to just pivot quickly, just to go through some of the Waterloo names as far as fifth year eligibility. Guys who last year would have played their last year of football, eligible football, include linebacker Jack Andrews, wide receivers Justin Sukar and Evan Basiliga. In terms of academic years, Cole Crosset, our guy, was doing his grad work after his career there, so I think he's probably done. And then you add in the mix Jordan Travis as a defensive back in his fifth year academically last year. Trevin Hallstedt, well, Tyson Hergott, but we know he's gone because he's just killing it for the Argos on
Mhm.
special teams for them as well. Steven Schwartz on the offensive line is another standout name that if he's not back, that could be big for them. And a few other guys as well, but I think covered the main names as far as who we might not be seeing this coming year. Looking at rosters, Tom, not knowing who's back, but having a sense of who might be gone, what do you make from that standpoint of how that may affect each of these teams' ability to take that step that we're really looking for them to do?
Mhm. It's with the McMaster Marauders in particular, it's once again beating the same dead horse, but we're talking about the caliber of player that they have on the offensive side of the ball. You've got Keegan Hall, Jackson Cooling, James Priestner, all of these guys who really showcase a ton of talent and a ton of capabilities. Now, as far as we know, James Priestner was out last year due to an injury. I've heard that he should be good to go for this year. He should be back on the team, ready and rare to go. Um, the big change with the McMaster Marauders that I'm really interested in seeing here, previously for the past couple of years, ever since the departure of Coach Galloway and Coach Corey Grant, Coach Stefan Potasic has been doing the play calling as well as being the head coach. Now, obviously, that's a ton of responsibility for one man, and I think that's taken away from a lot of his other responsibilities that he would have as a head coach. And as that head coach, when he was mine back in the day, he was really able to make sure that he was setting the tempo of the practice. He was making sure everybody was organized, getting things going, and trusting in his coaches to really get the job done here. I think as you're the offensive coordinator, you're trying to do that yourself. You're the one who's putting together the offensive game plans and all of that. Now, as far as I've been told, it certainly was the case in spring camp, and it sounds like this is what's going to happen in the regular season, is Coach Chris Hopkins is going to take over as the offensive coordinator for the McMaster Marauders, allowing Coach Potasic to get back into the head coaching spot and hopefully get this team back on track to where it should be. I am really interested to see what Coach Hopkins brings to the offensive capabilities here. He's one of these coaches when you talk to any guy, whether that's from Carleton, from McMaster, or anywhere else that he has been, every single person talks about how much they love this dude. He's a real players coach. He understands his guys. He knows when to push. He knows when to, take somebody aside and really try to give them that positive talk. I have a lot of faith in Coach Hopkins here. I'm just interested to see what he can do with this offense. The other side of me, that's being cynical is that while Coach Hopkins is fantastic, don't get me wrong, he has been the O-line coach for an O-line that has not done very well for the past couple of years here. So there's some give and take there, certainly. I certainly have mixed feelings, as you can tell, but I think as a whole, I think the offense, I'm more excited about the offense than I have been since, 2019 or even 2022 when Andreas Dueck was still there. I'm excited to see where these guys can go with Hopkins at the helm here. And I think that's going to be the biggest change going into next season is seeing how he can really try to motivate these guys and get them into a proper spot and hopefully figure out a way to run the damn ball again.
Well, and that's the key there. And frankly, you may have mentioned that to me at some point. It completely, if so, it completely vacated my mind that Coach Hopkins was taking over at the offensive coordinator position and beyond coaching O-line. And since he arrived at Mac 2 years ago, when he was at Carleton, he was doing running backs. The years of Nathan Carter, and of course the best years of that we saw of our Lord and Savior Josh Ferguson run the ball there. Which then again, like, it's interesting to think of. You mentioned Corey Grant, Todd Galloway, the last time they were in a Yates Cup and winning a Yates Cup. And both of those coaches clearly in their new programs that they've taken to really airing the ball out. And they had Dueck with them at Mac, some great weapons at receiver, and all the while still under Coach Potasic. And with Potasic, being here still and doing the offense last year, it very much was still very pass heavy, whether that was a product of, we and perhaps more so me were not pulling punches on where they were struggling last year on the offensive line. And obviously that can hinder your ability to run the ball. But it did feel like, hey, they got this young guy in Keegan Hall. They got these weapons as you already listed. Hopefully, as you said, yeah, we're getting James Priestner back. Pardon me,
Mhm.
and all these other guys. So it makes sense that they want to pass the ball. Does that give you but if it's just defenses can tee off and saying, hey, look, every down is second and long type of deal,
Mhm.
maybe this
Mhm.
helps round that off a little bit. As you highlight, it allows Patasic to maybe do some other things. If there's one thing I've learned working with you and being your friend, and I could tell this as being on the opposite side of the field from Patasic, he's a guy that, much like with Coach Lang, the players love. You want to go to battle for him. This maybe allows him to really lean into that aspect of what he already does so fantastically. On the other side of the ball, we mentioned some names defensively. It's, there's the whole not controversy, but all the excitement of whether the DC Scott Brady was still going to be there. The prospect of him coming to Guelph, like, just blew my mind. But
Mhm.
he returns, and he returns with a defense with just going over some of these names. We look at a guy like Teo Smith, Drake Bodie. We mentioned Bajalski almost certainly is gonna be out of there as well. We have Nania Serbe in the mix as well for them, and a few other guys. Not to go through the whole defense from last year, but and on the defensive line as well, guys like Mitchell Price, Alex Cheng, in the mix there as well. Even losing Ryan Leader, I imagine Owen Hubert, if he's back as well, that's huge for them. So a defense that, with that presence of Coach Brady being there, that kind of to play off of what we talked about with former Mac DC Greg Knox being at York now, when you're the new guy in town, even if you have the best system on earth, it takes time to install that, to have you guys learn it. This is a defense that knows their stuff and can be firing on all cylinders from day one. Yeah, you're probably replacing a few guys, but you're also having guys step up in some roles as well that will be helpful. So I think that's huge for them too, is knowing that you still have a young offense, because it's a new guy calling plays. It's still a pretty young quarterback in Keegan Hall. They're gonna still be, they're still gonna be cutting their teeth trying to form that identity. I don't think that offense has an identity other than we knew that you couldn't really run the ball. They were a passing team seemingly by proxy, it felt like at
Mhm.
times. But you have a great defense, and hey, you got Michael Horvat, a great punter as well in the mix as well, which when the offense ain't going too hot, it's great to have one of those guys in the mix. Do we want to look at some of the Waterloo side of things, or are there any angles here we want to keep playing?
Yeah, so there's a couple of updates on the McMaster defense that I think I have forgotten to tell you about.
Oh,
So I just need
Tom.
to I need to correct you here. I'm so sorry. Owen Hubert is now gone from that team. He's stuck at with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and has done very well. But so is Alex Chang. Alex Chang is no longer at McMaster. Believe he's in a graduate program at the University of California, Berkeley.
What a
So he
stud.
is I know he's an absolute stud, but that's a big loss on the D line with just those two guys in particular. Now, Scott Brady is a hell of a defensive coordinator, and we've seen that for the past few years. He was really all of those games that I just listed. The reason why McMaster could have been 7-1 instead of the record that they finished with is because that defense continually put the offense in positions to win, whether stopping Western in key areas, whether getting turnovers, whatever the case. That defense was all over the place and really anchored by my guy in Drake Bodie. I really loved his play that I saw from him last year and really just solidified that at his performance in the East West Bowl. I saw leadership from him. I saw a guy who wanted to win more than anything. And more importantly, I saw athleticism. I saw big hits from the dude. I think this defense is going to be reeling a bit from a couple of key losses in the front seven, and potentially some losses in the back end as well. But I think depending on the play of their star linebacker and Drake Bodie, depending on how the team can come back together with Scott Brady back at the helm, I'm still hopeful for this McMaster team, but there's a lot of ifs here, which is why we have them in that 50-50 tier.
Most definitely. Hey, shout out to Owen Hubert. I go Argos. I gotta watch more Blue Bomber content. Apparently, let's let's look at these Waterloo Warriors. We looked at some of the players that we have decent confidence are probably not there. And as far as thinking about guys like Justin Sukar, and James Basiliga. Um, or to have that, oh, it's is it Evan Basiliga that's aging out? Wait, James Basiliga. Hold on, I gotta solve that one. But whichever Basiliga brother it is, I'm trying to think of that obviously has been a boon for them on the receiving core. Major losses from the standpoint. Sorry, correct me. Don't let me be an.
James.
This is James. Okay, it
James
is James.
Basiliga is the one who's aging out.
Thank you. Um, um, not just major losses because of well, veteran receivers, high caliber veteran receivers are good for any program, but as well, this is a team where they it seems like last year, as of week 2, they settled on going with Nick Orr as the quarterback. They'd been playing around with a few guys in the mix. And like Caban obviously had shown some things in 22. It was a really boomer bust. He was throwing the ball a ton, getting touchdowns, but throwing a lot of picks in the process. He starts off the season for them when they were on the road in Ottawa and gave them a chance. But it seems like Orr's the guy. Obviously, having those veterans
Mhm.
is huge for them for a young quarterback. But let's talk defense because is a team that, as we mentioned, obviously has lost Tyson Hergott, arguably the best defensive player, if not front seven player, if you want to say it like that, however you want to frame it, in Ontario, arguably in all of Canada. They lose him to the Argos, but they get and they lose their defensive coordinator of a few years. They lose Coach
Mhm.
DA, goes to U of T. But set this up kind of had it as a little Easter egg in our last episode. Much like Greg Knox going to York, this is a team that picked up, signed, however the terminology is, uh, Coach Kevin McNeil, former DC and head coach, interim head coach at Guelph, the DC when I was there, who, again, much like we talked about with comparing a guy like Coach Brady to a guy like Coach Knox, just in the current iteration of their careers at the schools they're at, you might not be coming in year one with everything you have in that playbook. But and arguably you can speak to this better than I can, though I spent many years on scout team going against that defense. You went against them in live games. That's a defense where when that full playbook is open, and you have some of the dogs on defense, and Waterloo still has some of those dogs for sure. It's a nightmarish defense to have to prepare for. What type of a boon do you think this is for Waterloo? Obviously, hey, Coach DA was a really strong defensive coordinator for sure. You and I, though, have a little more familiarity with what type of system and what type of threat Coach McNeil's defense can do to a program once it's fully installed.
To answer your question, I'm gonna give you a little story if I could.
Ooh,
During my time starting as the offensive line left guard for McMaster, I had a hell of a career there. It was just a joy to be around. I saw a lot of different crazy defenses, from 7 man up to 30 front to 50 front, 40 front. Just all kinds of insane defenses, along with the blitz packages and everything that came with it. The only caveat to that is my first ever starting game, 2014 home opener against the Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins. I saw every one of those defenses in one game. He started first snap, first play that I ever started in 7 man pressure. We're expecting, it's a 40 front, maybe something super basic because it's the first game of the season. No, 7 man pressure. Then it's a 40 front, sure, but with John Rush, your President's Trophy winner,
yeah, oh
um,
yes,
President's Trophy winner at defensive end instead of his middle linebacker position to really just tee off and try to rush the quarterback. Then you've got a 30 front with George Gravilovic as well, the transfer in from Waterloo. My head was damn spinning that entire game, just seeing all of the different fronts and the players that were coming at me. Now, once again, this harkens back to the similarities we were just talking about with Greg Knotts in the previous podcast, in that yes, those schemes were unbelievable and they were difficult to block for sure. But the names that I just listed off, George
yeah.
Gravilovic was a phenomenal defensive lineman for a long time at Waterloo, and then transferred over to Guelph for his final year. John Rush, President's Trophy winner, Curtis Newton, all of those guys on that defense, Donnie Eggerter. Like, you've got some real studs there that you're able to do a whole lot of things that you want to. You don't have that same caliber at Waterloo right now. Certainly with the loss of Tyson Hergott, especially, you don't have that same caliber here. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes about that. Because certainly you could completely open up the playbook and say, everything's on the table. Let's just get learning and go from there. Does that set your team up for success? Depends on the quality of players, not just on the field and their athleticism, but the smarts that they have. Can they learn the schemes? Can they understand things? So I'm really interested to see how Coach McNeil can come about this. Once again, like you and I have said, phenomenal defensive coordinator. Really knew his stuff, especially when I played against him, and you went up against him constantly in practice as well. I'm very interested to see how he introduces that defense that can be so complex in the first year with a bunch of guys who don't know him as well.
Most definitely. And I'm also just imagining what those meetings rooms are going to be like. Just the amount of testosterone on that coaching staff is outstanding. Hit
Oh my
between
God, yeah.
you know, and on the offensive side of the ball. And one things that, frankly, as you mentioned, yeah, like we just go name for name. And I do like a lot of the names still on this defense. In the secondary, a guy like Diego Arenas, who I think was that safety for them, and Nessu Latmore in the secondary as well. On the defensive line, yeah, you lose Hergott, but you have a veteran like Trevon Halstead. You got Marcus Miller on that D line as well. Some guys that have been around the program. On the other side of the ball for Coach Conway, we talked about, you lose some of these star receivers that you had, or these really program solid receivers that you've had over the last couple of years. You have a quarterback who, again, we said the same thing with Scott Barnett, U of T, where it feels like going into this year, hey, Nick Orr's their guy there, right? And Orr knows that, and he's been able to prepare for that. And I can't wait to see who's the next receiver that steps up for this program, because they've certainly had some great receivers go through that program. But it's the run game that made this team. You had Hergott as this generational talent on the defensive side of the ball, and then you had a run game behind Anthony Miller and Quentin Springer, the rookie Quentin Springer, and a veteran O line that really kept them in games. And it really wasn't until it was. And I love this commentary from you, because we really got to get in our O line bag in terms of like the ins and outs of things. But until that MAC game where, of course, it's Conway calling up Bertoya, being born and bred in London football, loving running that power G downhill run game, and some blitzes that Mac was able to present that kind of slowed them down a little bit. I love that combination, though, of a team where it's like we have a solid offensive line, or pardon me, a solid run game. Mentioned they're losing Schwartz on that O line, a veteran guy, and a defense that, if they're not peaking this year, you have a defense coordinator with a good rep at building those a good program there. That I just love the notion of a team where it's like, we run the ball, we play good defense, and we got a quarterback in there who, again, the contrast with Orr and Caban was Orr's not gonna he's not gonna lose you those games. He's not necessarily gonna, so more of that game manager type. I like that combination. Whether that strikes for this year, though, that is left to be seen on that front. Should we get into our best case, worst case for these teams?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk quickly about that Waterloo
Yeah.
offense myself as well. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
said, I really like the two running back system that they have with Anthony Miller and Quentin Springer. I think showcasing them behind that solid offensive line they had was a fantastic thing. And I think especially getting away in that Ottawa game, I think they really tried to rely on Nolan Caban. I don't know if he's that guy that you can really say, hey, we're going to give you the ball 50 times to throw it and you're going to win us the game as of yet. And I don't think, to be fair, I don't think Nick Orr is quite there yet either, based off of what I've seen. Maybe there's some huge, crazy, training that they've done in the offseason. But regardless, that's kind of what I've seen. I think the idea of leaning on this run game continually, really making sure that you're wearing teams down, making sure you have to stack the box to keep that, uh, you know, getting into manageable second downs is really what I'm trying to say here. We have a
Mhm.
saying, and I've said this before, winning first down is going to be so key for every team, certainly, but especially for a team like the Waterloo Warriors, who maybe doesn't have the strongest quarterback in the back end. Really solid, don't get me wrong, but getting into a scenario where you are, second and five, second and four, rather than a 2nd and 10, 2nd and 11, something along those lines drastically changes the play calling that you're able to call. It puts them in easier situations in order to convert against quality teams. I really love the fact, I don't think we've outright said it as of yet, but Ethan Kalra is back with the Waterloo Warriors. He's a
There you
stud on
go.
the offensive line. He was in the CFL Combine, got the invite out after doing an awesome job at Waterloo, the regional showcase. He's back on that offensive line to really give some extra momentum and leadership there. I really, really am excited about how they're able to go about things. But like you said, with that, the comparison that I directly brought up with Waterloo and McMaster is that Waterloo, like you said, loves to do power G, loves the counter tray, loves to get big boys out and running, which some of my favorite plays. I'm sure it was the same for you as an offensive lineman getting the pull, but those take a long time. And when you've got a team and you've got a defense that's able to capitalize on that with either a well-timed blitz or just guys who are fast enough to get into the backfield while you're doing the motion that you're doing, that can blow things up pretty quickly. So I think last year we saw a lot of power G, a lot of counter tray as their bread and butter. I'm interested to see, do they try the zone play a little bit more? Do they try going stretch? Do they try to really start leaning on any more run plays that are a little bit more
Hmm.
fast and direct hitting? Or are they sticking with that Coach Bertoya Western mentality of let's put six guys at the point of attack and allow our star running backs to weave through and get going here? So I'm interested to see how that kind of plays out, certainly, but that's just kind of what my few notes are on this Waterloo offense.
No, I think that's brilliant. And honestly, I think what's gonna allow them to do that more is hopefully assuming a step of growth in Quentin Springer,
Mm-hmm.
who was as a rookie showed some really good things, and in contrast to Miller, who really seemed to fit that. Yeah, get boys to the point of attack, get downhill. You highlighted where that can hurt you, take an extra moment or two to set up. But really getting behind those big guys, putting his head down, and then finding space and breaking out. Whereas Springer was this lightning quick back. If you can now work that in, where and even if you get into two back sets where like you don't know, is the quarterback opening up to hand it to Miller downhill, or is he then reverse pivoting to Springer to there's some really cool things that we you could envision them getting creative with. And obviously Coach Conway has all the tools in his toolbox to be able to utilize those weapons. That yeah, I think you raise a good point. I'm excited again. I think Springer's a guy that I'm really excited to see him pop off and maybe get some more looks as a prime target for them. Um, oh, also before I forget, mention this talking about U of T. Not only is it DA, of course, going to U of T, taking over the head coach, but they had Jamie Cook as their quarterback coach at Waterloo. He's at U of T as well. So as
Mm-hmm.
we talk
Mm-hmm.
about the potential and the growth for Nick Orr, I'm sure I don't know who they have at quarterbacks now, but obviously that's someone who was working with Nick, who's not there now. Let's take a quick look at the schedule for the upcoming year. That'll help us transition into our best case, worst case, our final notes, and everything like that. For Waterloo, they open up at home, the return of Coach Adams versus U of T. They then head on the road to Western. They're home for two against Ottawa, and then the Battle of Waterloo against Laurier, which looks like will be held at Warrior Field. And then they finish up September going on the road to Coach Bertoya's arch nemesis, the Guelph Griffins. My Guelph Griffins, our Guelph Griffins, everyone's Guelph Griffins. And their October goes on the road at York, home against Mac, and then on the road against the Queens Golden Gales. For McMaster, quick, fast. Their schedule opens up at home against Laurier, then on the road at Queens. September, they're home against U of T, then on the road at Guelph, and then at Carleton. October goes home against Western, on the road against Waterloo, and then they finish up at home against the York Lions. Tom, what's our best case, worst case scenarios for these teams?
So these teams, similar to the previous teams that we talked about, do share at least one. For both of these squads, we believe the worst case scenario is a 1-7. I
Yeah.
think with both of these teams, based off of the highs and the lows that we have seen, if there's consistent lows, I think no matter what, they still squeak a win out against either one of the Toronto teams or maybe Mac against Waterloo or Waterloo against Mac. I think they squeak out one win there. I think that's realistic, but there's a very real possibility that both of these squads lose the other 7 games. When it comes to the wins, On the Waterloo side of things, based off of the schedule, based off of the travel and everything else, we are saying best case scenario, I can see a 4-4. I think it's a very tough schedule for them in terms of the opponents that you're playing. The one benefit is that this Waterloo squad is not playing against Windsor this year, so that helps them as well. But I think 4-4 is the best case scenario for McMaster. Um, Zach and I had a heated debate about this. I'm still sticking to my guns. I think best case scenario for these Marauders is a 5-3 season. I think if they're playing at the very top of their game and kind of just diving quickly into some of the schedule here for McMaster, like you kind of detailed, I don't see them as of yet beating Laurier, beating Western, or beating Queens. I don't think that they're there yet. I don't think that that's there. However, I
However,
think that there's a possibility at the bare minimum. Once again, you and I were a little fired up about this, but there's a possibility where they play against Toronto, obviously win there. They go to Guelph and then they go to Carleton back to back. That's a tough stretch, especially with the battle of the at the 55 Bowl
hell yeah.
happening in the Royal City that we will both be there for, and some special news coming up with that very soon. But to go along with that, I think that there's a possibility where they come out of September with wins across the board, 3-0. You lose against Western, and then you finish off with wins at Waterloo and home against York. I think that's the best case scenario for these Marauders. It's going to be a hell of a season here. Once again, same thing with Waterloo. They do not play Windsor in the regular season this year, so that's a big plus for them as well. But 5-3, best case scenario for McMaster, 4-4, best case scenario for Waterloo. Zach, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, Tom and I having a heated debate is still extraordinarily amicable. You couldn't predict that one. Honestly, putting aside just my bias of, being like so back in on my Guelph Griffins, I think the thing that really stands out about that scenario you paint, which again, it's not unfathomable by any means. It could very well happen. It just means that through September and October, Mac goes 5-1 to end their season. And hey, more power to them. And you know what? That kind of jives with what we're saying about you're in a 50-50 game against Toronto, beat them this time. You're in a 50-50 game against Guelph, beat them this time. You beat Waterloo last year, it was tight, but do that again. Take care of business against York. Arguably, like Guelph, that's a blood rivalry, like right there. Frankly, it's the going to Carleton that might be the tallest task. It's coming off that Guelph game, and it's before you host Western. That could be the trap game in the mix in that realm. So there's the part of me, and obviously we didn't talk about Guelph. They'll be in a podcast to come. Um, of where we think that team's at. It's not unfathomable. It's really just being like, and I think again, as you highlighted, it's being like if they're really on their stuff and they're catching a team not really just on their P's and Q's, firing all cylinders, can they take them out? Yes. It's just 5-1 in that 2 month stretch. That's pretty spectacular. But hey, from an institutional level, we know that they got the people calling plays and putting their players in positions to have success. Some losses on the defensive side. And again, if that O line can take a step forward and if they can form a bit of a run game, you know what? Yeah, I can see this Mac team. I feel like at some point in our conversation, I was just like, maybe Mac's just gonna be really good. Maybe this is just like whatever really good means, but like coming off of a few bad years. Again, it's that 5-1 down the last 2 months stretch that again gives me pause. But
Mhm.
again, I can see it. And yeah, for Waterloo, I mean, really for both these teams. Again, that 1-7 as a worst case scenario. And again, worst case means like technically worst case is 0-8. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen. But being realistic, it's like, hey, Waterloo, York gave you some fits last year in your
Mhm.
building. You're going to their barn. This is a New York team. What are they gonna have to offer by then? It's in October. What are the stakes of some of these games? And that U of T game off the jump, as we talked about with the best case scenario for U of T is them coming in being like, hey, it's the DA era right now. We're going to do our guy right. We're going to pick up the win for him. A team that as well you've been competitive with, you've been in that same ballpark with. So again, for that best case scenario, yeah, win that 50-50 game there, win that 50-50 game with Mac, with York. And then, can they steal one more in the mix? Who knows? But, for a team that was, again, 3-5 last year, hey, like we said with Carlton, that progress, that next step isn't always improving in the wins loss column. Is Nick Orr looking like he can be a quarterback that can lead you into the playoffs and win you a playoff game? Is this running game for real? Is Quentin Springer taking that next step, them having this dynamic two-back look? And is that defense with Coach McNeil in there going to weather the storm, losing Hergot and forming an identity that, again, I think this could be like the idea of McNeil, Conway under Bertoyas, like just sounds like, again, just like that's exciting. That's
Yeah.
a lot of volume. Again, a lot of testosterone in that locker room. I love it. Um, and yeah, Tom, what else are we missing here? I'm trying to think. I'm looking through my notes. What have we not covered with the 50-50 club here?
Yeah, so with Waterloo in particular, we mentioned in the best case scenario, you're winning the battle of sorry, the at the Red Blue Bowl. You're beating McMaster, you beat Toronto. I think the fourth game that you have the potential to beat is Ottawa. In the first game of the season last year, you were very close. You were in that same mix. You needed to perform. You needed to get things going. And admittedly speaking, that was a kind of an ugly game on both sides, if we're being honest. But still, you were there. You had the capabilities, and you didn't have all the pieces, or at least the understanding of what you did then that you do now. Nolan Caban was back there. I think it was a little pass heavy than it was run heavy. And now throughout that last season, you kind of found, hey, you know what? Quentin Springer and Anthony Miller, pretty damn good. We should give them the ball a little bit more often. If that's the mentality going into that Ottawa game last year, I think there's a real possibility that Waterloo comes away with that win. That's where we're coming out with the 4-4 mentality here. And that's what I foresee for these Waterloo Warriors. Once again, we talked about the 50-50 balls, getting into, or the jump ball scenario, winning those moments, taking advantage of those moments. Certainly going to be a lot harder for these Waterloo Warriors on the defensive side, losing arguably who should have been the defensive player of the year in Tyson Hergott. Losing him is a big loss, but having Kevin McNeil back there, having the defensive schemes back there, it's only going to help your team. It's only going to help you get to where you want to go. It's very interesting to see that both of these squads are in this kind of 50-50 range that we're calling it here. Is that 4-4 and 5-3 or 1-7? There's a pretty big gap in between what they could be doing, and that's really what we want to see. Win those jump ball moments and get there.
And that's what being a 50-50 team is. That if you take that step, it becomes a 4-4 year, which is growth for Waterloo. 5-3 is massive growth for Mac. But if you're not on the upside of those 50-50 games, it can go ugly. But with both these teams, I think we like the pieces in place. Now it's time to see how it all takes shape in the 2024 season. Tom, does that feel like a wrap for the 50-50 club tier?
That feels like a wrap, man. Lots of upside, lots of potential downside. Take the bull by the horns. Get some damn wins here, fellas.
That's what it's all about. And if you're keeping track at home, we've now covered 4 teams, which by our estimations, well, I guess it doesn't truly work out this way, but in theory, we're saying that those are the 4 teams that, again, best case scenario, they're sneaking into the playoffs. So when we're talking about Mac and Waterloo, we're saying your best efforts, you're sneaking into the playoffs. But we are saying, in theory, there are 7 teams that, in some form or fashion, whether it's consistency in certain realms, we've seen more things in certain aspects from these teams, whatever it might be, we have ahead of you. And only 7 teams make the playoffs. As a little Easter egg preview for Tier C coming up tomorrow, it's the only tier that holds 3 teams in it. Which teams will those be? Tune in tomorrow, right here at the 55.